Welcome to the In Pursuit of Luxury podcast. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to be chatting with Julian Vogel. Julian is a communication strategist and brand storyteller with over 4 decades at the forefront of the luxury industry. As partner of ModusBPCM, a global creative brand communications agency with offices in London, New York and Los Angeles, Julian has helped shape how some of the world's most influential brands engage with culture across fashion, beauty, wellness, design, architecture, arts, hotels, wines and spirits. A trustee of the Design Museum, an advisory board member of the Victoria and Albert Museum, Julian sits at the unique intersection of commerce and culture with an instinctive understanding of how great stories get told and who needs to hear them. For Julian, public relations has always been about 2 things: storytelling in all its forms and the building of communities, whether that's buyers, collaborators, press or end consumers. He believes that the bridge between a brand and its audience is built on clarity of purpose, a strong point of view and the courage to stay true to it. Julian, welcome to the In Pursuit of Luxury podcast. It's been ages in its making. I've been so looking forward to chatting to you, and so I just wanted to welcome you.
Oh, thank you. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Me too. So let's start with, you said in an interview that I read, why do you want to do this? So I'm asking you, why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do?
Yeah.
Gosh. I think that one of the things for me is, and it probably sounds really simple, but I love all those interactions with different people. And I think that what I'm so grateful for is the creatives and the people that I've got to work with. And whether that's, designers, stylists, photographers, editors, journalists, interior architect, there's this, it's just this sort of breadth of different personalities, different talents. And that for me it's just been fascinating. And my role in it is the sort of storyteller, the sort of extractor of what those stories are, and then crafting how to deliver them and how to tell them. And so I haven't necessarily been the creator of the sort of objects or the clothes or the projects, but to have been integral in sort of how to craft them and how to get them out there in the world has been, I just feel like every day feels like it just feels like anything's possible. And so to be that connector between the outside world, the inside world, getting the best out of people, getting them to really express what they're trying to say, what they're trying to do, and then see how to get it out there. It's been probably one of the reasons why I do what I do.
So going back a couple of years, how did it all start?
Well, my parents, sort of extraordinary sort of creators. My mum had worked in advertising in the 60s, and she'd been an art director, and she'd worked with Bailey, and she'd worked with Norman Parkinson, and she'd done all these campaigns with Camay, and so I didn't really find that out till quite late on, but I guess she was sort of always training our eyes and pointing out things to us. I've got a twin brother, Paul, who's a textile designer, and I guess there was always kind of objects, and she was an antique dealer at one point, and there were just all these sort of things at home that were sort of shiny and interesting. And my father had worked as a textile agent and then worked for Levi's. And there's lots of stories that he tells. We're never quite sure whether they're true or not, but he claims to have sold the first jeans in the UK. And he came across Levi's and sort of knocked, said, I can sell them. And they said, well, we'll give you £100 pairs and see what you do with them. And he sold them, instantly. So he was this sort of marketing person in the background when we were growing up as well. And there were always all the newspapers. And the other day I'd been given this like really beautiful photograph album, and I'd filled it with all the ads from all the magazines that were in the house. So I sort of noticed that when House and Garden came in, or Vogue came into the house, that there would be a series of ads. Like each month it would be, another series of and I didn't understand that it was advertising. But I loved the repetition, and I loved so there was all this going on in the background when we were growing up. I actually went to business school and did marketing. And then in my final year, my brother was working for a textile designer, and his girlfriend was working for a PR agency. It was Michael Rosen. And at school, I'd done lots of like stage stuff and building and production. And I loved the idea of, this idea of going to a fashion show. And so the girlfriend was like, she said, well, you can come and help. And I found myself at a Vivienne Westwood show in Olympia in 1980, I don't know, 86. Wow. And, Sarah Stockbridge was wearing a mini crinny, and just the whole theatre and kind of fun of it really appealed to me. But I was more interested I wasn't interested in making, I was more interested in the sort of how does it all happen and how do you communicate it. And so I sort of bunked off my accountancy lectures, which were probably the ones that I should have, in hindsight, I probably should have taken more notice of. But I'd bunk off and go to Fashion Week. And with Michael Rosen, we worked with Workers for Freedom, artwork. I met Louise Wilson without realising I was working on her degree collection from the MA. And then years later, obviously, I worked with her when she was at St. Martin's. So it was this melting pot, and there was just this real sense of fun. And then I got a job with Jean Bennett, who she was extraordinary. She invented fashion PR as we know it. And she's actually, the Ab Fab it's actually her and Lynn Franks. Because, Jean we'd be in the office, and she had one of those first mobile phones, the sort of, the big thing in the car. And we'd get this call, and she would literally say, I'm coming through the doors, which was one of the lines in Ab Fab. And she would, she was this sort of larger than life character. And I started working on Westwood shows. I'd never organised a fashion show, and I was, it was my first job, and they said, oh, organise the show. And I worked for her for about a year. Thought I knew everything because I was 22, which you kind of know everything. Yeah. And I'd met these two people, Diane and Richard, who'd started Modus Publicity, and I met them at some shows. And Jean kept saying to me, "Oh, you need to bring in clients." I was 22, but all these designers that my brother had gone to art school with were coming out of college. And I'd sort of try and get them as a client, and then this agency Modus kept winning them, and so I sort of spotted them in a room at a fashion show, and sort of made friends, and they said, oh, would you like to come and work for us? And I think in my sort of 22-year-old arrogance, I was like, well, only if I can become a partner in the agency. And they said, well, let's give it some time, come and work for us a year, let's see how it goes, and we'll see. And I went to work for them. We had all these young designers, and at the time it was people like Bill Amberg and Anthony and Alison, and all these sort of young jewelry, these young jewelry designers. And it just sort of took off, and I became a partner of, I think our turnover was about £30,000, but again, maybe the accountancy should have been gone to. But I became a partner, and then we went on this, this journey for 27 years of building the agency together. and it was sort of looking back, it's so strange because we worked with Birkenstock, and then I've got this whole story about Kate Moss and Melanie Ward and coming in and borrowing the Birkenstocks, which then they shot Kate Moss wearing on the cover of a face, and all these things that you didn't really realize at the time were sort of moments. We started working with Benetton. Then we got Calvin Klein, Catherine Hamner, and sort of as we got these sort of premium brands, our sort of I suppose our currency kind of grew. So yeah, it's funny looking back how it all sort of started.
Yeah. And so what are the biggest changes you've seen since that Kate Moss cover? Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I always think about, I kind of think about what hasn't changed first. Yeah. And I think for me, what hasn't changed is you need a really good story. And I think personal relationships, whatever happens, personal relationships are kind of so important, and we're in a business that is about people, and people like working with people. And whatever happens with AI, and however that, we'll probably talk about that. But I think those two things haven't changed. And there's some people that I work with now, I still work with now, that I met. So Anne-Marie Curtis, I met her on my first day at Jean Bennett. She had just started at Sky Magazine. She went on to become the editor of Elle. She's now freelancing. So, we grew up through the ranks together. Edward and Infel I met when he was assisting Simon Foxton on ID, and sort of still friends. So there's I think that relationship thing is as important as ever. But I think what changes really is the platform. So back in the day, that Face magazine cover or story, was part of a whole sort of realm of style titles, and they were the sort of casting. All the big brands used that magazine as a casting tool. So they would look at who were the photographers, who were the stylists, who were the models, and they would end up using them for the advertising campaigns. So I think there were platforms there. The big consumer magazines, the newspapers, they were all the way that we got the clients in front of consumers, and we activated sales. And I think that what the biggest change obviously was the internet in 2000, and that creation of another platform where people got their information. And then I guess social media and all that was another platform where people got their information. And then now we're sort of, we're all looking at Substack as another platform. And what I find funny about Substack is that it's all the sort of women's magazine, back in the day, women's magazine writers, and sort of almost creating their own sort of issue-based subscription service, but on Substack. So I think all that's really changed is it's different platforms and different ways that we get our information. When I think about celebrity, when my dad was at Levi's, he was dressing the Rolling Stones, he was dressing the Beatles for and then for Top of the Pops and things like that. So I guess at the time, if there had been social media, he would have been, dressing them for social media. So, and I think back to, we had this. I was asked. Birkenstock did a book, and I got out all our press clippings because I kept all the press clippings. So I got out 20 years worth of press clippings. And there was 800 pages, and I saw this extraordinary transition from they had a mail order catalogue, and we got features in the Times and the Financial Times about the fact that they had a mail order catalogue, and then we got features about the fact they had a website and an e-commerce, so it's interesting how what changes is just the method in which we communicate.
Yeah. And I mean, the storytelling is super important. I mean, everything's around storytelling. Yeah. What makes a really good story?
I mean, I was reflecting on this. Because I've been watching Love Story, the Bissett JFK story, and I started at Calvin Klein just after she left us being press office. And so I've been looking back at that and looking at how the storytelling around that and how much of Calvin Klein's wrapped into it and how you can create a whole TV show about this love affair, but you build in all the brands and what was happening at the time. So I think the storytelling is on so many levels, because it's the sort of, the product, how it's made, where it's made, what the materials are, who made it. But it's also the history of the brand, and is it a legacy brand or is it a new brand? Is it the story of the creative director? We're in this extraordinary moment, aren't we, where we've just watched all the shows from a whole army of new creative directors. And is it the story of how it's sold or where it's sold, or is there some kind of customization? So there's so many stories, but then it's, who are we telling those stories to? Like, who are the audiences? Who are the different communities? So for me, I'm always looking at, some brands, they obviously, I would say the majority of the story is being told to a consumer and to attract a consumer. But then, is it a story to an investor, or is it a story to recruit a new team member? Or is it an industry story, like you want to be part of something? So the storytelling is one thing, but it's also like, I always feel that you're using up oxygen. So there's no point just telling a story for story's sake. There needs to be a purpose to it. Otherwise, it's just vanity, and which is also something that we've experienced a lot over the years.
Sure.
But I think it's who's that story for? What's the purpose of it? Is it sales? Is it awareness? Is it philanthropic?
Because I've always been interested in this transformation of how narratives are created.
Yeah.
So in the late 80s, we had Jordache and Gloria Vanderbilt jeans, and they were designer jeans.
Yeah.
And designer was kind of the trend for 10 years, 80s to 90s. And then it became luxury.
Yeah.
How do you think that happened, and why do you think that happened?
The thing about Gloria Vanderbilt and Jordache is really interesting, because obviously they were using a celebrity to sell product.
Yeah.
And an affordable product. And I was actually thinking about Uniqlo and Claire Wright Keller right now, that they're using Claire. She's done. Some of the products is extraordinary. It's so well designed. It's great. It's great quality, and it's really, really affordable. But I think that this sort of, one of the things I think people don't realise is, if you actually look at how many stores Hermès had or Louis Vuitton had in the 70s, I think Vuitton had 5 stores. It's tiny. It was like Saint-Tropez, Paris. It was, and so there's also this moment of these brands kind of massively expanding, and not just doing what they did. If you think about Vuitton, it was, when it started, it was trunks. Yeah. And now look at what it's doing. So there were also a lot of brands that made one thing really well, like Ferragamo did incredible shoes. But now it's ready, and also they built the stores got bigger and bigger to deal with all the licensing and all the different products. And a lot of those brands got further and further away from their kind of nucleus. And then you look at like fragrance and makeup and home. And so there was this sort of, there was also this moment that I really noticed, because it was sort of when I started, there was this moment where money came into the industry. So there was a moment in the 80s, mid 80s, when I started, where like Peter Bertelsen had Agercheek, and he'd invested in sort of Catherine Hamner and Joseph, and there was a sort of this start of a sort of idea that someone could build a group. But when you think of it, everyone else was pretty much on their own, and they were these small businesses. And then there was this moment where, when I guess LVMH, but when they bought Vuitton, and then they started putting in other brands, and when there started to be MBAs in luxury, and then these groups, business came into fashion and started investing heavily, and really noticed that by having licenses and adding on, with Calvin Klein, when we worked with Calvin Klein, we started off with the eyewear license. and the structure was extraordinary. The percentage in the contract, the licensees had to pay a certain amount of turnover to Calvin's design company to produce the adverts and all the material. So the eyewear company was paying $15 for each press pack.
Right.
And the company that they were paying it to was Calvin's own personal sort of production company.
Yeah.
But you had these licensees coming in, and you had these groups kind of growing and really understanding how fashion could be a business. And I think that was the moment that it really changed.
When you think about the scale now, so Louis Vuitton, the trunk maker, Louis Vuitton now, the everything maker.
Yeah.
I mean, what impact do you think it has on these on the perception of what luxury might be?
I think luxury, because it's funny now, because we have affordable luxury, don't we?
Well, yeah,
and we have
that's another conversation.
And so I feel like this word luxury, and we were talking, weren't we, that everyone says, oh, the biggest luxury is time, which is true. But what we're talking about is, we're talking about a consumer and what luxury means to a consumer. And when we start looking at the sort of the different tribes, like we know there's the luxury consumer who wants the badge and wants everyone to know that sweatshirt, that even though it looks like it's from Patagonia, is from Balenciaga, and it's however much it was back in the day. So you have this consumer that is a conspicuous consumer, and then you have this luxury consumer that's really inconspicuous. That just it's, and we had quiet luxury. So, this idea that they're quite luxury in this. Originally quite luxury, where you literally couldn't tell that sweater could have been Uniqlo or it could have been Loro Piana. But then we had the moment where everyone wanted you to know that it was quite luxury, and that the baseball cap from Loro Piana was £650.
Yeah.
So I think it comes back to the sort of human, maybe it's all the human tropes, and how they want to present themselves.
But so, I mean, the question I've asked, and I realised I wrote an article for Graphic magazine.
Yeah.
So this is probably like 19 years ago, and the same question I was asking then. I was reading it the other day. Is the same question I'm asking now. Is that if everything's luxury, what is luxury?
Yeah, I know.
Because we have, I'm very much about considering the craftsmanship. And the preservation of craftsmanship and skills and
I'm so with you on that. I think it's different things to different people, because often the thing I wanted to bring into it was, we're so privileged, and to be even to be talking about this, and luxury, luxury to one person could be that they can eat. I mean, so we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we're lucky to be in the sort of top of the pyramid, where we're talking about whether we're going to buy a really expensive bag or so. So I think that I do love this idea of luxury being like a Chanel lipstick, or that you can buy into you can buy into this luxury world. There's an affordability. You can afford to buy a YSL fragrance, or and actually what I find really fascinating, we mentioned vintage earlier, but what I find really fascinating is that I'm actually wearing a Tom Ford YSL jacket that I bought on Vinted. I mean, I've got Tom Ford YSL jackets that I bought at the time. But I bought this from Vinted. It was £300, so it's more than it wasn't the sort of. But I know that if I go into YSL now to buy a navy blue blazer, it will be £3,500. And for me, that doesn't feel like luxury anymore. Actually, buying this on Vinted feels more luxurious, because it's got a history, it's got a provenance, and in my head, I'm thinking back to that time of seeing it on that runway, and so if somehow it's imbued with more sort of more feeling and more sort of preciousness in a way.
But also now, I mean, that is that's a few years ago, the Tom Ford YSL, and that was a pinnacle moment in fashion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas today, the Tom Ford isn't Tom Ford anymore, and YSL
Is something. Well, I don't. But then it's funny because I think with Tom Ford, the show that we saw a couple of days ago, I think it could be something that people look back on in 20 years' time and desire it.
Yeah. I mean, the question you mentioned, the Chanel lipstick, and I think to myself, is that luxury?
Is it?
It's a mass-produced product, and it's luxury because it's Chanel, not because it's a lipstick.
Yeah, but then I would argue that everything that's gone into it, like there's an iconic design to the casing, the color. They do such an amazing job of constantly reminding you of Coco, in positive ways, and constantly. So it's sort of, there's so much mystery and mystique, and it sort of, I suppose in a way, if I've often thought, because we've grown up with it. And it's been sort of we've been indoctrinated maybe, or that you placed all this additional value to it. Whereas if somebody didn't have any knowledge of it all, would just look at it and say, well, that seems expensive to me. It's the case costs this, and the packaging costs that, and the raw ingredients cost that. Why are you paying so much money for it?
Well, that's the brand value, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because ultimately the product,
it's not worth it's not the sum of its. Some of its parts.
But then why can't that just continue? Because it's part of this fashion narrative. Why can't that just be designer? Why does it have to be luxury?
Yeah. Yes. But then I think that's the problem with this word luxury. It's a bit like the word lifestyle, isn't it? It's sort of it's been sort of perverted in so many different directions. I mean, I found something. My mum passed away, and I found something in her cupboard, and it was this tiny teapot, and it's Royal Crown Derby, like the most incredible decoration, all sort of hand decorated and gilded, and inside. So that's one level, which is like really beautiful, and I could date it from the marks. And then I lifted the lid, and inside there was a torn piece of paper from an antique fair where she'd bought it, which was in 1974.
Wow.
And then there was another piece of paper in this tiny ink, scratchy writing that said, gift to Gilbert Smith on his retirement from the factory, and then the day. And then, so suddenly it's like, it's my mum's, it's Royal Crown Derby. It's then got this sort of, and to me, that feels so luxurious. And yet it might be worth a few £100, tops. So it's not the value, it's not the monetary value, but for me that so maybe luxury is where luxury is moving to, or maybe it's a schism that it's preciousness, and then what does that word precious mean, and is there more words around that?
Yeah, maybe. But you talk about you mentioned the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I also read in something that in an interview you did when you mentioned the hierarchy of needs, and you were talking about kind of the social structures and how at the top end you might not care as much, and at the lower end you probably wouldn't care. So if you're going into Primark, for example, would it matter? But do you really believe that?
I mean, it's funny. I just think that if you're scrabbling together to pay money to eat, and you need to clothe yourself, are you going to think, oh well, I'm going to pay £5 more for this because it's been made with organic cotton, or are you just going to think, I need to wear something, or I don't know. I'm privileged to not be in that position, but my inkling was that on the whole, you need to have a certain level of income to make those decisions. But I'm not saying that. But then on the other hand, you can be a billionaire and not care as well. So
that was my point.
So it's a sort of, I think it's a bit of a good I think it's a good discussion point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, you were talking about kind of shifts in how stories are told, whether in the past, whether it was a magazine or through a mail order catalogue, and now it's, social media and everything's kind of virtual. And then you see these, and I hate even saying the word, the influencers.
Yeah.
These super wealthy guys and girls going into stores and kind of spending £100,000 or £1 million on a watch. And they'll just buy the watch, and they filming themselves buying the watch, and off they go, and they've got an £1 million watch. And are they thinking about who made it? Or are they just buying the £1 million watch?
Does it matter?
Does it matter? Exactly.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was actually thinking that actually there are some great influencers, and there are some really good content creators who like really educate and really help to tell the story, and actually help the brands sell. I mean, I had one situation we were working for J.M. Weston shoes, and I took Nick Fowlkes to the factory, and it was before social media, and they showed us the process and these skins being buried in this soup of all sorts of things for 18 months. And then we went around the factory, and there were 300 processes. And I actually thought at the time, well, these shoes should be more expensive because and I thought social media would really help this, because then someone would actually, instead of just going into a shop and seeing a pair of shoes and being told they're £700, you see this film showing, the care and the techniques and the dyeing crafts, and would you then potentially pay a bit more because you realise that you're supporting something. And so I think there is some social media that's done a really good job of really highlighting just quite the level of detail and level of craft. If you care about it.
Yeah. And that's the point. I think it's important to care about it, because otherwise we lose all of that. So then you get the lipstick again, and how Chanel lipstick or any like 40 quid lipstick, and then you get a £700 pair of shoes. But £700 is not even a lot anymore.
I know, it's crazy. But it's interesting how the brands that are doing well, like the Chanels and the Hermès, when you look below the surface, they really are like all the Chanel Crafts and Métier projects, where they really are sort of working in Hoik with the tweed makers, or they are setting up these schools or setting up these processes, because they realise that if they don't do it, they won't actually have those skills to make their clothes. And actually, the other day I was looking at like another thing that my mum has, which I think all mums and grannies and of that generation, just all this lace and doilies and then you realise that actually most of that probably can't even be made anymore. Like no one knows how to use those bobbins and those patterns, and you think that how much is already. We're finding we're working with because we're working also in lots of other categories, but we started working with some interior designers, and they're actually really preserving crafts, and they're really almost being like patrons from the past, and actually commissioning work and finding either established artisans or young artisans, and really commissioning them to make sure that those crafts are sort of available. And then the clients who are buying these, they've got the clients who actually do seem to care about it and do want, a wall made out of, sort of marquetry leather, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and that I'm super interested in, that there is that work still going on, and it is going on. But there's no but. I mean, just going back to the Chanel thing, and this might be cut out. I wrote a piece about Chanel and the Barry factory. And at the this is a few years ago, and at the time I mentioned I was questioning the Chanel jumper and the jumper you bought from Barry and the price discrepancy, it being the same thing. and they were threatening legal action.
Yeah.
And I said, but justify, how can you justify it? It is the same thing from the same factory. I've been to the factory. And that's where I suppose, challenge.
No, Well, I think what I find quite interesting is when you, so I got quite a few Laura piano pieces from my dad, and I thought I'd go in and, I don't know, I thought I'd go in and get a baseball cap. And I went in and it was £650. And I actually felt really insulted. Like I felt it's not that I can't afford to spend £650, but I actually felt like you're taking me for a mug in a way. And then I went to Loewe, and I wanted to get one of the puzzle bags.
Oh, the bag, yeah.
And it was £1,800. And I was having this moment walking down Bond Street, thinking, you guys have got to get real. Like, you cannot treat your customer like this. Like, you can't rip them off. Like, I know what some of these things cost. I know where the leathers come from. I know the factories. I know, and it's interesting, isn't it? Sort of, at what point does money come in and a boardroom decide to sort of put a price on it that's so inflated that you're actually taking the piss?
Yeah. And I think, and that's, for me, that's a really important point, because I think you know Catherine Sargent, who we both know well. I mean, you can go to Catherine, you can spend time with Catherine and have a suit made, and you might pay £7,000 or £8,000 for it. But you might go into another luxury brand, we won't name it, but you just might go in and they'll say, yes, they'll custom make something for you.
Yeah.
But they're not actually custom making. They're using, there's a template, and they might take measurements.
It's made to measure.
And it also might be £7,000. And then I think, well, younger or emergent or even existing makers are really struggling because the brands have such power in their storytelling that they can command the prices and the custom.
And I think that, I mean, it's funny, I've been working with the brand Métier, so I launched Melissa's brand, and actually at the beginning she said, one of the messages I want to get across is that we make in the same factories as Hermès, but we're less. And I was like, well, I can't tell that story. Like, press aren't going to write, oh, well, this brand is making, because it's not done. And then actually what happened was, last year, I think Business of Fashion did a piece, and they said, oh, these are the brands that are making, they didn't say making it, but they said these are the brands that, there's a whole raft of new small accessory brands that are making very premium products at a price that is more, I didn't say affordable, because it's still $3,500 for a bag. But they said, it was an interesting sort of category. And I called her and went, look, you got what you want, I never thought anyone would ever say that. But going back to the designers, that's our biggest challenge. Actually, we're still working with, we've always supported young designers right the way from when we started the agency, and it's something that it's our investment, because we don't really get paid. We don't get paid a fraction of what it costs us, but it's our investment in the industry, and that is the hardest thing. And actually, what some of the traditional ways are still the ways that we get coverage. So we're working with this fantastic men's designer, Luke Derrick, and one of the ways that we've got a lot of coverage for him is through celebrity dressing. So a lot of actors wearing his clothes on the red carpet, a lot of those men's stylists seeing it and choosing him, and then he's up for the LVMH prize, so then that gives him more recognition. He got bought quite early on by Dover Street, so Adrian and Dickon have been amazing at sort of supporting. It's funny to think that it's Comme des Garçons that are actually supporting a lot of the young designers.
Well, it used to be Browns, didn't it?
Yeah. So it is still the hardest thing to get cut through. But I also think that we keep going through these cycles of everyone wanting the logo and wanting the designer brand, and then wanting something that's a bit more individual, or that no one else, they've discovered it. So we keep going through those cycles. But the hardest thing for those designers is to keep going and selling enough. And they don't have licensing deals yet. They don't have all the things that provide revenue for fashion brands when you get to a certain size. They've got to get to that point, and they don't have their own store because rates and rent are so expensive. So yeah, that's still the hardest.
Yeah. What is kind of looking back at Modus? I also want to talk about Maison Margaux.
Oh yeah.
Can't miss that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, just thinking about Modus, and it's like, is it 40 years? 30?
Yeah, it's something like there's 20. Yeah, what is it? I started in sort of 89. So yeah.
So it's, nearly.
Yeah.
So
it's 38. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, kind of. So you've got 80s, 90s, 2000s. What are the kind of what are your the highlights of those
of the decades?
Of the decades.
I know it's funny you asked that, because actually over the summer I wanted to do a bit of a timeline, and I wanted to put in our proposals and on our website, and I wanted to do some posts on Instagram. So I actually started mapping out the decades, and it was so funny. I guess like I started like late 80s. So the Kate Moss Birkenstock thing was pretty seminal. But then working with Benetton on all those sort of shocking ad campaigns. But then in the 90s, and again, it's funny talking about the 90s because I talked about Love Story and all the Calvin Klein stuff. But we were working with Tom Ford at Gucci Group, so we worked on a lot of the Gucci Rush and a lot of on Gucci watches and jewelry, and so we were with Tom Ford doing these extraordinary activations. And we did one. We worked with in the 90s. We worked with Boucheron. Boucheron was part of Gucci Group, and Solange Azzurri-Partridge was the creative director. And Solange was a really old friend, and I didn't realise that she was even there. And I got this call from someone in Paris saying, "Will you come to Boucheron for the day to meet us to talk about doing our PR?" And actually, Boucheron had been the first client I'd worked with when I was at Jean Bennett, so it was a bit of a full circle. So we got on the Eurostar, went to Paris, went into the store, got ushered up to this sort of very Versailles, sort of drawing room, and with all the double doors, and then they said, "Oh, will you come this way?" And they opened one set of doors and another set of doors, and then they opened a set of doors and it was Solange, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "Well, I'm the creative director." And she said, "Look over here, look what I can see from my window," and it was. It was like the Ritz, and it was the whole of Place Vendôme. So that some of those 90s moments of these brands that were really building themselves and building themselves through extraordinary events, extraordinary shows, working with the best architects and best designers, and then I think Calvin Klein was a massive chunk of time, because we started working in 96, and then we only finished probably 2 years ago.
Right.
So I worked with Calvin, I worked with Francisco Costa and Italo Zucchelli, and then worked with Raf Simons. So I mean, went on this extraordinary journey through the house, and also through a brand that was, licensing, but in such a controlled way. Like I remember we had this, I keep meaning to try and find it, we had this guidebook that was how the flowers needed to sit in the vase, how the ribbon was tied, every single detail. But the reason for that was, and I learned it with Catherine Hamnett, was that you would sign a license deal, say, for South Korea. And I remember being in a meeting with Catherine, and David Chipperfield was designing the stores. And then, so they'd had a meeting, and David had said, "Oh, well, it's going to be like this," and he just sort of did a few sketches just to show his thinking. And then Catherine turned up in Korea, and they built it from the sketch.
Wow.
So there was this need at the time to control, to make sure that you had all these licenses, but you made sure that you were protecting the brand at the same time, and that everything had to be done in this very, very prescriptive OCD way, because you were protecting the brand. And then I think 2000s, God, what was it? We started working with all the department stores. So we worked with Vittorio Radici when he was at Selfridges. And we did this. It was when, do you remember when Selfridges was, you'd go and buy your fridge there, and
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't
No, it wasn't
the sort of luxury.
Yeah.
It was like we say she was like the grande dame of Oxford Street. Sort of is a bit sort of dusty.
Yeah.
And Vittorio came in, and one of the first things he did was he actually put an escalator through the middle of the store, because there wasn't one.
No.
And we did this extraordinary event it was when all the the young British artists, the YBAs were happening.
Yeah.
And we did this extraordinary event where we had a feminist poet in the beauty hall sitting on a lipstick, and we had a sort of we would have said at the time a transvestite spouting poetry in the kitchen department, and Sarah Lucas did something, and then we had Kylie. We had these Busby Berkeley dancers on the escalator to open the escalator, and then Kylie in a cherry picker sort of in the space. So these just extraordinary kind of happenings. So yeah, it just feels like, and then we did it when we started working in beauty, and we worked with MAC, and we did RuPaul.
Right.
I took RuPaul to Dublin, and there were priests campaigning outside Brand Thomas that it was ungodly, and so it's just, there's this sort of richness that sort of it feels like a real romp through the decades, and now it's and now where we are is we're really working at this intersection between all of these cultures. So we're working with hotels and fashion and beauty and and design and culture, but they've all started melding. So we're working with Belmond, and we just launched a train carriage that Baz Luhrmann's designed. Mm-hmm. But with hotels, you're just as likely to have Olivia de Havilland doing a pajama thing, or a beauty practitioner coming in and working in the spa, or a retail pop-up space. So it's interesting how, what I feel that the hotels are really excited about is they saw what we did with fashion and how fashion built story and community. And a lot of those big fashion executives are now in hospitality, because the hotels have almost become this space. Not that you just sleep there, you experience all these other things.
Well, and I think that's the thing is, whether it's a train carriage or whether it's a yacht, a smaller yacht rather than a princess cruise. And a hotel. I mean, everything's about experiences now.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about a physical product.
No.
It's about what you might get to get that.
And I also think when you say experiences, that's also where luxury's come back to, because I was talking to some of the retailers in the Middle East, and what their customer wants from luxury is these experiences that no one else can get. And so the brands are having to create things in retail that will impress these luxury consumers. Yeah. But they do want something that's been made. They want to know where it's made. They want to know who's made it. They want to know that there's a very few of them. So I think that customer has actually gone back to what we would traditionally think of as luxury.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's definitely there has been a slight shift in how, I suppose, people who can afford that might not spend £4,000 on a Chanel shirt, but they might spend £4,000 on whittling a spoon somewhere in the Outer Hebrides.
Yeah. I think that's true. And so maybe for some of those consumers, they've gone through. Maybe there's some of them have actually gone through feeling a bit ripped off. Yeah. And they're now coming out as educated, more discerning, and actually maybe there's hope that some of those 1% will be passionate about preserving things as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Maison Margaux. Tell me about that. How did that start?
So my husband has an events company called Polar Black. So he actually does all the events for all the people that we're talking about. Yeah. So he's organising all the dinners and all those incredible experiential events. And him and his business partner Louisa, I think they were doing all these dinners, and in England it was always the same china that you get from all the hire companies, and they were doing an event at Versailles, and they were like, well, when we get to Paris, it will be different. There'll be all this amazing china that we can, and there wasn't, and it was the same stuff. And then I think they did an event for Chanel, an event for Dior, and I think it was for Chanel. They ended up having to commission pieces for the table because it was that special.
Yeah.
And they thought, hold on a minute, there's something here. And about a year, and then so they said, look, we've got this idea, and I said, well, I want to be involved because I've got a real passion about ceramics and China, and from my mum, from the antique dealer, and then Louisa's husband was looking for something to get involved in. So there's about 6 of us sort of got together, and we did an initial buy. We went to Maison Margaux and we just bought a whole load of stuff from our favourite brands, and we're ready to just rent out. It was a rental business. We thought, well, Polar Black will use it for their events, but then other events companies will be interested in using it. And we launched it, and then a week later, lockdown happened.
Okay.
So it's like
no parties.
So there were no events, no parties. But I then went into sort of PR overdrive, and sort of there were loads of friends who were influencers who were doing small dinners at home, or people started, elevating their table at home because everyone was eating at home.
Yeah.
So we started sending out sort of things for people to use, and then we actually just switched into sales. So that first Christmas, we actually ended up selling all the stock that we bought, because everyone, do you remember, everyone was spending money on their homes.
Yeah.
And then now, 5-6 years, fast forward, the rental business is booming, and we've actually started. We're mainly actually designing our own, because we found that with all the stuff we were buying, everyone else was copying us. So there's still some factories we work with buying their china, but we've actually started designing a lot of our own, and it's also table linens, napkins, glasses, cutlery. And then we actually found another part of the business we didn't realise. So we were doing a bit of retail, we were doing the rental, and then some friends were opening the roof gardens, and they said, can't you do all the china and glassware for us? And they said, it's OS&E, and we're like, well, yeah, I guess we can. We've got all the contacts. So we pitched, we designed, it was 5 restaurants, we designed we put all these mood boards together, as we all know how to do a mood board. We put all these mood boards together, put these looks together, and we won the contract. And we've just done all the banqueting china for the Mayborn Beverly Hills. Wow. We've just done a private club in Palm Beach. We're doing a hotel so that's become another part of the business, which is this sort of actually designing and manufacturing for hotels and private members clubs.
Oh, brilliant. And then that lady we just met.
And the lady we just met.
Yeah.
We're going to have a chat with her.
Yeah.
I'd love to be more involved. I'm sort of more, I guess I'm more involved on the strategy and making introductions and, doing the PR side of it. Right. I'd love eventually to be more involved in the business, but it doesn't need me right now.
So, and then is the table linen, is the linen from Ireland, or is it coming from Europe?
We've got a real mixture. Like we were really lucky. Walpole, we were part of the Brands of Tomorrow program, which was amazing, and so Walpole took us under their wing, and we've been working with Stoke on some of our china, with Cadiswell, but actually, and we've been working a lot. We've been working a lot in Spain and Turkey, but actually, it's been really hard. Like we really want to do more in the UK, and it's really hard because it's all about the margins. And when we're making for hotels, part of what they want is part of the sort of china they want. They want it at a really good price. We found that with a hotel we're doing in Mexico, 80% of what we're making in Mexico. That was very important for the story. But I'm actually working on an initiative to do with Stoke. So I make my own ceramics at Studio Pottery London in Eccleston Yards, and Lucy Atwood, who runs it, we've got together and we wanted to try and figure out a kind of charity initiatives where we can actually fundraise for making. So we met with lovely ceramicist Kate Malone, and she's got a charity called Fired Up For, and she's been putting ceramic studios into schools. So we were helping her a bit, but then we had a chat with Emily Johnson at 1886, and she was talking about the factories are disappearing, and so we're in the middle of a meeting to sort of figure out how could Maison Margaux get involved in, if we were to commit a certain amount a year, would that help? We're looking at, do we raise money for apprenticeships? Because the apprenticeships take like 5 years. Do we raise awareness so that people actually want to go and do apprenticeships? Because no one seems to know, school kids don't know that these things exist. And then I'm going to have a meeting with the King's Foundation as well to see if we can pull all this together in some way. So I think that we all have a sort of a duty and a kind of responsibility to do what we can. And I think with Maison Margaux, we're a young business, and at the beginning, a lot of it, we had to look at our margin and had to manufacture as best we can. But I think that for the future, we want to be able to have more in the UK, supporting more British making, and see how we can sort of play our part.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm working on a project now, which is looking at how we use kids to influence change.
Yeah,
because
great.
they're mostly ignored.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily always listen to their opinions.
No. Well, the other thing I found was like when my daughter, when she was sort of 16, they gave her the same careers talk that they gave me. And it was this Cambridge aptitude test. And when we looked through the book, it's a book that has all the jobs. So they do the aptitude test and tell you what you should do. And should I know they're going to tell me I should be a social worker because, I'm kind and empathetic. And then I looked in the book and I looked at what the fashion jobs were. There were 5 jobs. You could be a window dresser, a designer, a model. And I was like, well, I could come up with 100 jobs. Yeah. And then I talked to a friend and she's like, well, I'm in the film industry and there are 10 jobs. And then another friend went to pick up, was so passionate about this, trained to be an art teacher. And she went into an inner city school, and there was all this incredible talent. But at Parents' Day, the parents said to her, why are you filling my daughter with these ideas of being a graphic designer or a game designer or she's not going to make any money out of that. She needs to be a nurse, or she needs to be, and so there's a lack of understanding of what the jobs actually are and what the opportunities are. And so if school kids aren't inspired to sort of realize that there are these jobs that they could go into and they could make a living, then we're never gonna fill the roles.
No, and I don't think window dressers exist anymore.
No, I don't think they do. I think there is VM.
Maybe. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about that kind of that weird world that we're inhabiting. How's that impacted on you and your business?
We're doing a whole project at the moment, actually, of creating our own pilot that's a closed system for the company, because what happens at the moment is we just did a whole audit. Everyone's got their own ChatGPT or their own Claude, and that sort of pilot is learning you personally. But what I need a company-wide one. So all of that's outside of the company, and it's all lost for me. So we're looking at how we can use it in terms of press cuttings, contacting journalists. It becomes more of a CRM system without having to tap it all in, because it's already there. Yeah. So what what we want to use it for is more admin tasks, so that all that boring, we have someone who has to compile a report and has to go through all the press cuttings and log them and attach a file of what the press, it takes hours and hours. Or like we had a job the other day with for one client for Belmont where Condé Nast Traveller awards comes out, and someone spent 100 hours going through and logging which country and who the competitor was and where they were in the ranking. And whereas we can train AI to do that, and it will do it really quickly. So I'm loving the idea of it saving time. I'm worried about what that means about entry-level jobs, because if AI is doing that, does that mean that the people that the job that I did when I didn't know anything and I just came in and I was hanging, maybe hanging clothes in the showroom is going to be fine. But I'm worried about what that means to for when we have an entry-level job. So for me at the moment, we're really focusing on how it can help us with the boring admin things. Right. And when it comes to creativity, I found it really useful actually for Maison Margaux. I found it really useful to when people aren't very visual. Like we were doing this banqueting job for the Mayborn in Beverly Hills. I just went on ChatGPT and said, create a gold rim play in the style of Frank Lloyd Wright, or in the style of Hollywood, or in the style of, or I want palm leaves, or I want, and it was great because it just churned out lots of different things. We were never going to use any of them, but it was a visual reference to say, when you say this, how about this? And in a way, I don't feel like it's necessarily taking away anything. It's helping to communicate. But whenever I've tried it to do anything that I haven't managed to get it to do things that I would use for a client. It's been great for decks, and it's been great for illustrating something. But I would much rather use, for now, I'd much rather use real people. Whether in the future where budgets are going to get cut more and more and more, and whether everyone then gets forced into finding a cheaper way of doing things, I don't know.
And that's interesting that you say you wouldn't use them. I mean, I still believe that, a machine is, in some instances it might be able to replace the human, but in instances like that where you've got the creativity, prompts are not the same thing.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think that I'm quite interested. My son just graduated from Trinity in Dublin in English, and I think he would be such a brilliant prompter, because he's got all the knowledge, he's got all the references. In fashion you need, like, we've got so much shorthand, and you need to have all these references. You can't, like, there's an expectation that you know who these artists are, you know who these illustrators are, you know who these designers are, and AI doesn't. I mean, it needs someone to tell it. It needs someone to point it in those. It's got all the information, but it needs someone to point it in that direction. And I was with Ronnie Cook Newhouse, and she was saying that a Hollywood friend of hers has said, we can, I don't need you to do that picture for me. I can get AI to do it. And she said, okay, let me give you why don't I give you the prompts and let's see what it comes up with. And she's like, I want like Helmut Newton in a John Lautner sort of house in 1985, and just like really specific. And then he didn't call her back, and she's like, what happened? And he said, I'm really embarrassed. And she said, what's it? And he sent her the picture, and it was like one of those kind of Mills and Boon sort of romantic. And so I guess her point was, it can do something. It can do, and it will do more and more and more.
Sure.
And I was actually challenging her and saying, well, if you put the entire Vogue archive into a pilot, would it have then been able to answer your brief? And maybe it would. If you educate it to that level.
To that level. Did you mention something about somebody's collecting 30 years of magazines?
No, but I've got ridiculous amounts of magazines.
Oh, okay. I want to talk about your ceramics for a bit, because I'm intrigued. So how long have you been doing ceramics for? What are you making?
Well, I did actually start at school, and it was funny. I wasn't allowed in the art room because I couldn't draw. And so I was sort of banished to the ceramics room. Right. And I had this amazing teacher. So at that point, I was about 13. I had this amazing teacher. And actually, I just went last week to an exhibition of hers.
Oh, wow.
And she's become this amazing artist. But so I'd always done it. And then when I left university, I did adult education on a Thursday and met this amazing woman who'd been in Japan. And I think it's just always been a really good creative outlet for me. And so now in the last few years, I've been doing it much more seriously, and I've been going down to the Leach Potteries in St Ives and doing a weekly course. And it's really just a creative outlet. It's not. I was thinking the other day, I love the fact that I don't want to be commissioned. I don't want any pressure. I just want to be able to make things without any just make stuff and give it away. And maybe in the future I'll do more with it. But I just think for what we do, and I spend so much time around so many people talking, coming up with solutions. it's a really nice antidote to just sit in this studio. I don't really know the people who are there. I mean, we sort of say hello, but it's just this kind of focus on making, and maybe it also gives me an appreciation of materials and process and time, and I think with ceramics, it's so actually hard to get something at the end of it, because there's so many moments in the process where it can just get destroyed.
Yeah.
And so there's something and there's a sort of alchemy about the process, which I really love.
And what's the style? Is it like Japanese style?
Yeah, it's actually quite, at the moment it's quite...
I can imagine that.
And one of the designers that I worked with for a long time that I absolutely loved was Margaret Howe. And I loved that sort of simplicity. And I love that sort of British studio style of pottery. And actually, the first time I went to St Ives to Leach, I realised that the logo of this sort of seal, I remembered it in the art room in the pottery room at school. And then I went had a coffee with my old teacher, and I went to her house, and it was actually filled with all the things that was like, she had an Eames lounger and Vitsi shelving and all these copybooks, and sort of she had like trays of stones, which I have at home. And she said, "Yeah, don't you remember? I used to encourage you to pick things up." And so I don't know. There's something about ceramics that I think the process has been quite formative in my eye, in the way I look at things, the way I appreciate process. All the factories I've been to for all those brands, you sort of, maybe that comes from that appreciation of, taking a lump of earth and adding some water and a bit of heat, and
voila.
Yeah.
And do you have lots of stuff at home?
And what of ceramics
that you've made?
Of course. I do. Yeah, I do. Actually, last year I decided I wanted to sort of try and make repetition. So I made 29 sort of mugs with this sort of mark on them, and I gave them away as Christmas presents, and that felt really good that people were actually using, because I'm a bit of a hoarder.
Right. Okay. And are you a fan of Edmund Duval?
I love what he does. Yeah, I was lucky to go. I'm on the board of the V&A, and we had a sort of outing to his studio.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see. Like, he had something like 180 white glazes and then 90 black glazes.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of, I'd love to own some of his work.
Yeah, I have a friend who collects it, and she's got a sideboard, and it's exactly that.
And it's just amazing.
It's amazing.
But I loved his books as well. I really enjoyed reading his books and the story of his family, and
So you mentioned factories, talking about going to lots of factories. Yeah. What's the thing that strikes you most when you're going to a factory that is mass producing and then a factory isn't, where they're making smaller?
It's funny, actually. One of the people I was really lucky to work with, Priscilla Carluccio, Terence's sister, and she had this shop Few and Far, and she was really obsessed with this batch making and things being made in a limited edition. It's funny, I was thinking, like, some of the tailoring, like some of the factories I've been to, like Acris, the Swiss brand, I mean, their processes it's just that Swiss precision. And everything is, there's such a high level of, touch. But then there's still certain processes where, a laser will cut, the fabric will be layered, so there's 20 garments, and the laser will cut those 20 garments. So there's moments in the process where it's all by hand, and then there's moments in the process where technology is used in order to, I don't know, get the most from the pattern out of the fabric, or and then even with Benetton, like when I went to Benetton, they actually would send quite a lot of the stuff was cut in their factory, and then it was sent out to piece workers locally to make it, and then you'd go back to the distribution centre, and there was a robot pulling the boxes and packing it. I've never been. When we worked with Unico for a long time, and I really tried to get a factory visit, and they wouldn't let us go. And I was quite, at the time, I really wanted to know what was happening with the workers and how it was being done. And at the time it was very Japanese. Like now it's it's completely international. But at the time we were working with Japanese,
right?
And they would say, well, they they have a holiday, they have a day off, and they have really nice accommodation, and they sent us this booklet about the accommodation, but we can't send this out. It was in dormitories, and
Yeah, right.
they were like, yeah, but you don't understand. They would say, you don't understand. That's really good. That
Right.
and they're like, yeah, but you don't understand. When we say really good, we're comparing it to. So it's interesting.
Wow. We could go on for hours.
I know. What time is it?
Yeah, it's 12:15.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, maybe I'm going to ask you what your luxury is.
No, I knew you were going to ask me.
Yeah, well, I have to.
And I'm not allowed to say time.
No, don't say time.
I think it is this. It's just seeing something where like so much thought has gone into it, and whether that's the design or the make or the materials, and it could be a pair of gardening scissors at Nisake, or it could be my mum's Crown Derby, or it could be like, I love going into labour and weight, and there's a ruler or a rubber, or it's sort of, but there's just something about it that there's been so much like consideration.
Yeah.
So it's not about the price. It can be just about the sort of thought and what's gone into it.
Brilliant. Julian Vogel, thank you so much for joining me on the In Pursuit of Luxury podcast.
That was great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you to Julian for joining us. Thank you, of course, for listening. And thank you to Henry's Townhouse, our sponsors. And don't forget, you can catch up on all previous episodes of the In Pursuit of Luxury podcast on your favourite listening platform. And you can see us on our YouTube channel, where there's so much content around luxury that you don't want to miss any of it. And at In Pursuit of Luxury, we have many other things going on. We have our executive training, which happens in London and in Zurich. We have Luxury Studies, the In Pursuit of Luxury journal, which is published quarterly. And of course, we have the In Pursuit of Luxury conference, which is a collaboration between Goldsmiths University and Ravensbourne University, and will take place in September 2026. Join us for the next edition of the In Pursuit of Luxury podcast next time.